This story is titled, False Accusations from Family and Golden Brother Got Me Kicked from University. After his death and my wealth, they want me back. Hey Reddit, I'm 28 years old now, but I was only 21 when everything went down. I need to tell this story because recent events have brought everything back to the surface. Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride. Growing up, it was always just me and my younger brother Daniel. From the outside, our family looked completely normal. We were upper middle class, lived in a nice house in the quiet suburbs of San Diego, had regular family dinners, and did all the typical stuff that normal families do. But beneath that picture-perfect facade, our family dynamics were completely messed up in ways I didn't fully understand until I was older. Daniel was always the golden child. And when I say always, I mean always. Not trying to brag, but I was an excellent student throughout my academic career. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA throughout school, started a mentoring program for underprivileged kids at the local youth center, and even led our mock trial team to the state finals. I did everything right by the book, exactly as a good kid should. Meanwhile, my brother barely maintained a 3.3 GPA. He spent most of his time organizing house parties and playing the latest Xbox games. But somehow, in my parents' eyes, he was just a misunderstood genius who learned differently. Those were their exact words, not mine. To give you a quick example of how bad the favoritism was, one semester in high school, I got straight A's across all my classes. My mom just nodded and said, "That's expected of you." That same week, Daniel got a B- in English, and my parents took him to Morton's Steakhouse to celebrate his improvement. I'm not even making this up. This was our normal. Fast forward to college applications. I applied to UC Berkeley, which had been my dream school since childhood. I had perfect grades, solid extracurriculars, and had studied like crazy for the SATs. After months of preparation, I scored a 1540, which I was incredibly proud of. That's when Daniel suddenly decided he wanted to go to Berkeley too. Not because he had any particular interest in the school or its programs, but only because our dad went there. He had this whole thing about continuing the legacy. This decision is where everything started going downhill for me. I got my acceptance letter first. I remember that day perfectly. I was in the kitchen eating leftover Chinese food when an email notification popped up on my phone. I started literally shaking when I read it. The first person I called was my best friend Thomas because I knew my family wouldn't care much about my achievement. When I told my family about my acceptance during dinner, they just went, "Oh, that's nice," and immediately started talking about how Daniel would surely get in too. It was such a typical response from them that I wasn't even surprised anymore, just disappointed. Speaking of Daniel's application, this still makes my blood boil when I think about it. He barely studied for the SATs and got a 1290. His essay was complete BS. He wrote about how organizing house parties taught him leadership skills. Like, seriously, what kind of nonsense is that? I actually tried helping him study for his application. I stayed up late explaining calculus problems, helped with practice tests, and did everything I could to support him. But he'd always quit after about 20 minutes, saying stuff like, "Not everyone needs to be a try-hard nerd like you," and then go back to playing Elden Ring. Then came the day Daniel received his rejection letter. Holy shit, what a show that was. He came home from checking the mail and literally threw himself on the kitchen floor crying. He was 23 years old at the time, not 12, acting like a toddler having a tantrum. Mom and Dad came running like he was having a cardiac arrest. Meanwhile, my Berkeley acceptance letter was still on the fridge, buried under takeout menus and Daniel's old lacrosse team photo. It was like my achievement didn't even matter. The next few weeks were absolute hell. My brother locked himself in his room, only coming out to make dramatic sighs and give me dirty looks. My parents started acting weird too, making comments like, "Some people get all the luck, and life isn't fair to everyone." Meanwhile, I had worked my ass off for years while he coasted by on charm and bullshit. But somehow I was the lucky one. The irony was not lost on me. The real kicker came later. Daniel had been telling everyone, extended family, his friends, even random people at the grocery store, that Berkeley was his destiny because of our dad. He even had a Berkeley sticker on his car already, which was so embarrassing in retrospect. So when the rejection hit, instead of admitting that maybe he should have worked harder, he started spreading stories about me. At first, he just told people I must have done something shady to get in. He suggested I probably cheated on my SATs or knew someone in admissions. But it got way worse over time. Looking back now, I can see this was just the start of his plan to screw me over. The rejection broke something in his brain. He couldn't handle that his destiny didn't work out, and instead of dealing with it like a normal person, he decided that if he couldn't go to Berkeley, neither could I. So, picking up where I left off, I finally got to Berkeley, and the first few months were actually amazing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could just be myself without my brother's shadow constantly looming over me. I got super lucky with my roommate situation. I ended up with this dude Oliver from Sacramento who was into bioengineering and actually enjoyed studying like me. Finally, I had someone who didn't make me feel like a weirdo for liking academics and taking my education seriously. Our dorm room was in this older building. Nothing fancy, but it had huge windows and was right next to the dining commons. A perfect location, really. Oliver and I set up our desks facing each other and did these late-night study sessions fueled by Monster energy drinks and those cheap Target cookies. We had this whole system worked out where our door was usually open when we were studying. So lots of study groups came through. But we had a strict rule about closing it after 11 p.m. so we could actually get some sleep. Life was actually going great. I was maintaining a 3.9 GPA. Quantum mechanics messed up my perfect 4.0 comma, but whatever. I joined the robotics club and was working on this breakthrough biochemistry project that was catching attention from big pharmaceutical companies. This Merck recruiter kept hanging around our department, and my professor hinted that I might get a summer internship. Everything was finally falling into place for me. Then weird stuff started happening. I noticed people in the dining hall looking at me and whispering. Some would even move to a different table when I sat down. At first, I thought maybe I had bad cologne or something, but it was more than that. One day, this guy from my calculus class, someone I'd never even talked to before, came up to me after class and asked if I could hook him up. Confused, I asked, "Hook you up with what? The homework?" He just gave me this weird look and walked away without explaining. About a week later, our RA Theodore pulled me aside after a hall meeting, trying to be casual. He said there were some concerns about my activities. I had no clue what he meant until he straight up asked if I was selling Adderall to other students. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. I don't even take aspirin for headaches, let alone deal drugs. That's when he showed me screenshots of someone who had been deeming random Berkeley students on Instagram, pretending to be me and offering to sell them study drugs. The messages were written in this weird way. They kind of sounded like me and used some specific phrases I typically use, but they definitely weren't from me. There were even fake conversations where I supposedly confessed to stealing my brother's research project to get accepted to Berkeley. I knew immediately it was Daniel behind this. I found out later from his ex that he'd been stalking my social media, studying how I wrote, and making these elaborate fake conversations. The research project accusation was especially rich, considering this dude once asked if Linux was named after Linus from Peanuts. But the situation got worse, way worse. Oliver and I had this routine where we'd hit the 24-hour library together to study. But one night during midterms week, I got the worst migraine of my life. I was seeing spots and was about to throw up. The whole deal. Oliver practically ordered me to stay in bed, assuring me he'd share his notes later. He was a good guy, Oliver. The next morning, I dragged myself to my 8 a.m. class because I'm an idiot who somehow thought scheduling an 8 a.m. class was a good idea. When I returned to my dorm, there were campus police officers waiting at my door. It turns out someone had anonymously reported me, claiming I was dealing drugs from my dorm room. They searched the place and found a shoebox full of weed and unlabeled pills under my bed, right where I kept my spare textbooks. Here's the thing. Only 3 people knew about that hiding spot. Me, Oliver, and Daniel. Daniel had helped me move in, complaining the whole time about how my dorm was nicer than his room at community college. I specifically remember showing him where I stored extra books, and he even made some joke about hiding snacks from Mom there when she visited. I was freaking out, trying to explain that the drugs weren't mine. Then, 3 students came forward claiming they'd bought Adderall from me. I found out later that Daniel had paid them with his savings from his Subway job. Imagine being so petty that you spend your whole summer sandwich making money just to screw over your brother. The really messed up part? My parents were already planning to drive up to campus that day. They showed up right as I was trying to explain everything to the officers. Instead of defending me, or asking questions, or doing anything normal parents would do, my dad just stood there texting someone with this weird little smile on his face. Later, when I saw the phone bill, I discovered he'd been texting Daniel the whole time. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly orchestrated it all was. Daniel knew exactly when I'd be vulnerable, during midterms. He knew about the hiding spot in my room, had spent months building up this fake drug dealer narrative, and even timed it so my parents would witness my humiliation. The next few weeks were a complete blur of meetings with the dean, disciplinary board, and campus police. Oliver tried defending me, telling them how I was the most straight-edge person he knew. Someone who wouldn't even drink energy drinks because I was weird about putting substances in my body. My professors wrote letters about my character, but it didn't matter. They had physical evidence, they had witnesses, and that was that. This is where everything really went to complete shit, and it still makes my blood boil even years later. The university investigation was a complete joke. They found drugs in my room, which I'm still 100% sure Daniel planted. Had these 3 random students claiming I sold them Adderall. I later found out Daniel paid them $500 each from his Subway savings, plus all these screenshots of me supposedly messaging people about drugs on Instagram. I tried everything to prove my innocence. I literally offered to take a drug test on the spot. I showed them my bank accounts to prove I hadn't been getting any mysterious payments. I even had my high school teachers write letters about how I was this straight-edge kid who once reported someone for having cigarettes. Not my proudest moment, but you get the point. The disciplinary hearing was on a Tuesday morning. I remember this specifically because I was supposed to present my biochemistry project to a Merck recruiter on Wednesday, a project I had been working on for months. The hearing was held in this stuffy room in the administration building, and I felt like I was on trial for murder. The disciplinary board consisted of 6 people sitting at this long table, looking at me like I was El Chapo Jr. My parents were there, which somehow made everything worse. My mom kept doing this fake crying thing. No actual tears, just weird sniffling noises. My dad spent the whole time texting, and I later found out from the phone bill that he was giving Daniel live updates. Like, who does that to their own kid? The worst part was when they brought in the witnesses. These 3 guys I barely knew from my dorm building. They claimed I'd been selling them Adderall since the first week of school. They had this whole detailed story about how I'd meet them behind the library at specific times and had special prices for bulk orders. All this elaborate BS that made me sound like some professional drug dealer. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking about how I literally had to Google what Adderall was when Theodore first accused me. Oliver tried his best to defend me. He got up there and told the disciplinary board how I was probably the most boring roommate ever. Someone who wouldn't even drink Monster Energy during all-nighters because I was paranoid about artificial sweeteners. He explained our open door policy and how anyone could have accessed our room. He even pointed out how my grades were perfect and I was in line for that Merck internship, so why would I risk everything to sell drugs? But none of it mattered. They had their evidence, and their minds were already made up. The dean had the most punchable face I've ever seen as he read out this long statement about how Berkeley has a zero-tolerance policy for drug distribution and how they had to maintain the integrity of the institution, or whatever BS that was. The expulsion letter was 3 pages long, but I only remember the first line. Effective immediately, your enrollment at University of California, Berkeley is terminated. Just like that, everything I'd worked for my entire life was gone. They gave me 48 hours to clear out my dorm room. Packing up my stuff was surreal. One minute I was a promising bioengineering student with a potential Merck internship, and the next I was shoving all my dreams into cardboard boxes while people whispered in the hallway. Some even took Snapchat videos of me carrying boxes to my car. Real classy. My parents showed up to help, but they mostly just stood around making everything worse. My mom kept saying stuff like, "I just don't know where we went wrong with you." My dad was still texting Daniel, and at one point, he actually smiled at his phone. I guess my brother sent something particularly funny about my life being ruined. As a final punch to the gut, the university wouldn't release my transcripts because I had disciplinary actions pending. So not only was I kicked out, but I couldn't even transfer somewhere else. Oh, and they still expected me to pay the full semester's tuition. Cool. Oliver was the only real friend I had left. He helped me pack until 3 a.m., and then we just sat on my stripped bed eating vending machine Doritos, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. His parents called while we were sitting there. These super chill neurosurgeons who could tell something wasn't adding up about the whole situation. They offered to let me crash at their place in Boston until I figured things out. But the worst part was my grandparents' reaction. They'd co-signed my student loans, and my parents immediately called them about the expulsion. Instead of hearing my side, they just assumed I'd turned into some drug kingpin. My grandmother actually said, I always worried all that science stuff would lead you down a dark path. Like, what does bioengineering have to do with drugs? By Thursday night, I was completely out of Berkeley. 7 years of dreaming, studying my ass off, doing everything right, all gone because my brother couldn't handle being rejected. The funny thing is, and by funny I mean absolutely infuriating, he was doing fine at community college. He could have just accepted that's where he belonged and moved on with his life. But nope, he had to make sure I lost my shot too. This next part's pretty rough to write about. After getting kicked out of Berkeley, I basically had nothing. No college, no money, no place to live, and a family that thought I was Walter White Jr. or something. Thank God for Oliver and his parents. They let me crash in their guest house in Boston. It wasn't anything fancy, just this converted garage with weird small windows near the ceiling and a futon that definitely came from someone's dorm room. But honestly, after everything I'd been through, it felt like a 5-star hotel. Oliver's mom would leave breakfast outside my door every morning, usually just granola and green tea, but it still meant a lot. His dad helped me look for jobs online. Finding work was a complete nightmare, though. Try explaining to employers why you got kicked out of Berkeley without sounding like a complete degenerate. I finally landed a job at Target, working 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shifts, stocking shelves for $11.50 an hour. Barely enough to buy gas for my car, a beat-up 2008 Honda Civic. I bought off Craigslist for $2,000, which was all the money I had left from my summer job. One job wasn't going to cut it, so I picked up afternoon shifts doing Uber Eats deliveries, then worked from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. at this sketchy sports bar called the Penalty Zone. The owner paid in cash and didn't ask questions about my background, which was nice, but the place was definitely a front for something illegal. Like, why does a sports bar need 3 safes in the back office? My apartment was actually just a converted storage room in this rundown house that I shared with 4 other guys. When I say storage room, I mean it literally used to store cleaning supplies. It was so small that I had to choose between having a twin mattress or a desk. I couldn't fit both. I went with the mattress and used my laptop while sitting on my bed. One of my roommates, Victor, was definitely a real drug dealer, which was ironic considering my situation. But he was actually one of the nicest guys there. He would sometimes share his mom's homemade enchiladas when I was too broke for groceries. The worst part wasn't even the crappy jobs or the tiny room. It was the feeling that my whole future was just gone. I would scroll through LinkedIn and see my old Berkeley classmates posting about their internships at Merck and Johnson & Johnson, while I'm trying to figure out if I could afford both ramen and toilet paper that week. Oliver would call to check on me, but I eventually started dodging his calls. It hurt too much to hear about how great everything was going at school. My parents tried calling a few times too, but only to tell me what a disappointment I was and how Daniel was thriving at community college. Like, wow, good for him for managing to pass basic English while I'm living in a literal closet because of his lies. They even had the nerve to ask if I was clean yet. I blocked their numbers after that. The only thing that kept me sane was studying between shifts. I would go to this 24-hour diner called Sunshine's that had free Wi-Fi. I'd buy their cheapest coffee, $1.50, and just sit there for hours, working on random chemistry experiments. The overnight waitress, Barbara, was this older lady who would sometimes accidentally bring me extra fries or a slice of pie that was going to be thrown out anyway. She never said anything directly, but I think she could tell how broke I was. Sunshine's became like my second home. It was quiet at night, nobody bothered me, and I could pretend I was still a real bioengineering student instead of a college dropout working 3 dead-end jobs. I built this chemical compound tracking system for fun, just to keep my skills sharp. Looking back, that project actually ended up changing my life, but I'll get to that in the next part. Some nights were really dark though, like sitting in your car crying after a 12-hour shift dark. I remember this one time I was doing an Uber Eats delivery, and I delivered to a house that looked exactly like my parents' place. The dad who answered the door even looked kind of like my dad. I had a full breakdown in their driveway, which probably scared the shit out of them. Rock bottom was probably around month 4 of this lifestyle. I got sick, like really sick, with some kind of flu. But I couldn't afford to miss work, so I ended up passing out during my Target shift. My manager, Kevin, actually drove me to urgent care himself. Shout out to Kevin, you were a real one. The doctor said I had a 103 degrees fever and was severely dehydrated. I still went to my bar shift that night because I needed the money for rent. The crazy thing is, Daniel was living his best life during all this. I found out through mutual friends that he'd tell people I was away at rehab or working through some issues. He even took over my old room at my parents' house, sold most of the stuff I'd left behind, and used the money to buy a PlayStation 5. Alright, so remember that chemical compound tracking system I was building at Sunshine's Diner just to keep myself from going crazy? That actually turned out to be my ticket out of rock bottom. But let me back up a bit. I was sitting at my usual booth at around 1 a.m., running on my third cup of $1.50 coffee, when this guy in an expensive suit walked in. It was kind of weird for Sunshines at that hour. The place usually just had truckers and other insomniacs like me. He sat at the counter and started chatting with Barbara, the awesome waitress who kept accidentally giving me free food. I was half listening while coding when I heard him complaining about how his pharmaceutical research lab's software was complete garbage. They were losing compound data, double booking lab equipment, and dealing with all kinds of chaos. Barbara, who'd seen me coding there for months, actually spoke up. She said, "You should talk to my friend over there. He's some kind of chemistry genius." I was not a chemistry genius, just a Berkeley dropout with insomnia and free Wi-Fi. But this guy, Nathan, came over and asked what I was working on. I showed him the system I'd built for fun, which was honestly just to keep track of what chemicals Sunshines was throwing out. I was trying to help Barbara reduce waste. Nathan got all excited and asked if I could build something similar for pharmaceuticals. Next thing I knew, I was picking up some freelance work from his company, maintaining their systems. It was only about $20 an hour at first, but that was nearly double what Target paid. Plus, I could do it between my other jobs. Nathan kept finding more stuff for me to do, fixing their database, building a better tracking system for lab experiments, that kind of thing. About 6 months in, I'd automated like half their lab processes. They were saving so much time and money that Nathan offered me a full-time position as their chemical systems specialist. The salary wasn't amazing, $45,000, but it came with health insurance and an actual desk in an actual office. No more storage room bedroom. Here's where it gets interesting. Being around pharmaceutical research all day, I started picking up on how everything worked. I would overhear chemists talking about compounds, see how they handled experiments, and absorb all that knowledge. One day, the lab supervisor called in sick when they were supposed to run important tests. Nathan was freaking out because it was some big-shot client's project. I offered to help since I knew the testing protocols from the system I'd built. It was a total fake-it-till-you-make-it moment. I watched like 5 chemistry tutorial videos on my way to the lab, but somehow it worked. The clients actually liked that I could explain both the technical aspects of chemical analysis and point out potential optimization opportunities. They ended up choosing our lab for their whole research pipeline. Nathan called me into his office the next day, and I thought I was going to get fired for overstepping. Instead, he offered to sponsor me to get my pharmaceutical research certification. He said my tech and chemistry background gave me a unique angle. I could talk to all these biotech companies in their language. Studying for the certification was rough. I was still working full-time plus taking classes at night. But compared to living in a storage room and working 3 jobs, it was a piece of cake. I got my certification in 4 months and started as a junior researcher. I made exactly 2 breakthroughs in my first month and thought I was hot shit, but then something even better clicked. I realized I could combine my tech knowledge with pharmaceutical research in a way nobody else was doing. I built an AI system that tracked drug trial patterns and could predict which compounds were likely to succeed based on molecular structure and previous trials. I started focusing on helping biotech startups navigate research pipelines. My first year as a research lead, I made $88,000. Not bad, but nothing crazy. Year 2, $145,000. Year 3, $285,000. Turns out all those hours crying in my car while doing Uber Eats deliveries actually taught me something about perseverance. The real breakthrough came when I landed a huge account helping a pharmaceutical company relocate their entire research division from New York to Boston. We're talking 50-plus researchers, all high-end equipment. The commission on that deal alone was more than 4 years of my old salary combined. Now I'm the youngest VP of research in my company's history. I did $1.8 million in lab contracts last quarter alone. I bought my own house in a nice neighborhood where all my neighbors are doctors and lawyers. I even got a German Shepherd named Binary. Yes, I'm still a massive nerd. You should hear him bark when I say run test. The crazy part? I actually make more money now than I probably would have with a Berkeley biochem degree. Sometimes I check LinkedIn and see my old classmates stuck in basic lab jobs they hate, while I'm over here working 30-hour weeks and making bank. Oh, and remember Barbara from Sunshines? I still go there for coffee sometimes, but now I leave $100 tips. I helped pay for her daughter's wedding dress last year. She still tries to give me free pie, though. So here's where my story catches up to the present day, and I'm still processing all of this. Last Sunday, I was out in my backyard grilling ribbies and playing fetch with Binary. Still the best dog ever. Even if my girlfriend says teaching him to respond to chemistry terms is peak nerd behavior. It was a perfect Boston afternoon. Sunny, but not too hot, with some music playing. I was just chilling with my dog. Then Binary started going crazy, barking at the front of the house. He's usually pretty chill with delivery people and neighbors, so I knew something was up. I walked around to check, and there was this black Mercedes parked in my driveway. For a second, I thought maybe it was a client. I get a lot of pharma exec types these days. But then the doors opened, and yeah, it was my parents. I hadn't seen them in 7 years. My mom looked like she had aged about 20 years. My dad had this weird attempt at a beard that made him look like a bargain bin Walter White. They were just standing there, staring at me like they'd seen a ghost. The first thing out of my mom's mouth was, "Your house is bigger than we expected." Not hello. Not we missed you. Not even sorry for believing your brother and ruining your life. Nope. Just passive-aggressive commentary about my house. Classic mom. But then I noticed their faces. Like, really noticed them. They looked broken. My mom was wearing no makeup, which never happens, and my dad's hands were shaking. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. They told me Daniel had wrapped his car around a tree while leaving some club in Miami 3 weeks ago. He died on impact. Apparently, he'd been working as a social media consultant there, which probably means he was one of those club promoter guys who get paid to bring hot girls to parties. Honestly, that tracks with his personality. Here's the really messed up part. They weren't just there to tell me about Daniel. They came to apologize. Turns out my old roommate Oliver, who's like the head researcher at Merck now, ran into my mom at some pharmaceutical conference in Chicago last month. He didn't know Daniel had died yet, but he basically told them everything. He showed them all the evidence he'd saved from back then. Oliver had screenshots of Daniel's fake Instagram accounts, records of the money he paid those students to lie, and even security camera footage from our dorm showing someone who looked suspiciously like Daniel going into our room the day before the drugs were found. Oliver had been collecting this stuff for years, hoping someday it would help clear my name. According to my parents, and honestly, I'm still not sure I believe this, Daniel had convinced them I was this evil genius who'd stolen his research project to get into Berkeley. Remember how he barely passed high school science? Yeah, apparently he told them he'd been working on some revolutionary chemistry project in secret, and I'd somehow hacked his computer and stolen it. They claimed they had no idea about the drug setup. They said they really thought I was dealing because Daniel showed them evidence. Probably those same fake screenshots he was sending around campus. My mom started crying, saying they'd spent years thinking they'd failed as parents because their son was a drug dealer, only to find out their other son was actually the monster the whole time. They're telling me this while Binary just sits there, giving them the most judgmental dog look ever, like he knew these were people who had screwed me over. Good boy. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to scream at them about how they should have known better. Like, they raised me for 18 years? Did they really think their straight A, never even drank Monster Energy son suddenly turned into Pablo Escobar? But another part of me just felt empty. They kept talking about how proud they were of what I'd accomplished, despite everything. My dad actually tried to take credit, saying the adversity they put me through made me stronger. I literally laughed in his face. I told him that's like pushing someone off a cliff, then congratulating them for learning to fly on the way down. Then they started in with this whole thing about how they've lost one son and don't want to lose another. How they want to be part of my life again, meet my girlfriend, maybe even be grandparents someday. My mom noticed a photo of me and my girlfriend on the wall and started crying about how she looks like such a nice girl. My girlfriend's a chief trauma surgeon, by the way, and way out of my league. I just couldn't deal with it. I told them they needed to leave. They tried to argue, but Binary started growling. Seriously, best dog ever. They finally got the hint. As they were leaving, my mom turned back and said, "We really didn't know about the drugs. We just believed him because he was our son too. That's what's really messing with my head now. Like, maybe they really were just victims of Daniel's manipulation too." But then, I remember how they treated me my whole life, way before the Berkeley thing. How nothing I did was ever good enough, how they always took his side. I found out later they got my address from Oliver. He ran into them at that conference, and they seemed so devastated about Daniel that he felt bad for them. I can't really blame him. Oliver has good parents, so he probably couldn't imagine parents actually trying to ruin their kid's life. Update. It's been about 2 weeks since my parents showed up at my door with the news about Daniel, and everything's gotten even more complicated. They came back yesterday, just showed up again unannounced while I was on a work call. Thank God for Ring cameras. This time they brought a whole box of evidence, old photos, Daniel's journal entries, stuff they thought would somehow make everything better. Like showing me pictures of family vacations from 15 years ago would erase the fact that they helped destroy my life. I didn't even go downstairs to let them in. I just watched them on the Ring camera while Binary barked his head off. I finally called the cops when they wouldn't leave. Watching my dad try to explain to 2 police officers why they were just trying to reconnect with their son was both sad and hilarious. One of the cops actually asked if I wanted to press harassment charges, but I just wanted them gone. Here's the thing that's really been messing with my head. After they left, I called Oliver to basically yell at him for giving them my address. But he told me something that made me stop mid-rant. When he first ran into my parents at that pharma conference, they genuinely didn't know I wasn't a drug dealer. Like, they were still telling people their son was lost to addiction or whatever. Oliver said when he showed them all the evidence he'd saved about Daniel's setup, they looked destroyed, like their whole world was falling apart. Apparently, my mom threw up in the conference center bathroom after seeing proof that Daniel had paid those students to lie about buying drugs from me. But here's my problem. Even if they really didn't know about the drug setup, which I'm still not 100% sure about, they still, 1, never believed in me my whole life, 2, always took Daniel's side no matter what, 3, didn't try to contact me for 7 years, and 4, only care now because their favorite child is dead. My therapist, yeah, I got one, turns out getting betrayed by your whole family leaves some issues, says I need to separate 2 things: forgiving them for believing the drug allegations and forgiving them for being shitty parents in general. She might have a point. I've been thinking about all the times they chose Daniel over me, way before Berkeley. Like when he broke my science fair project in 6th grade and they said I shouldn't have made him jealous. Or when they spent my college fund on his 3rd attempt at starting a business. It was a dropshipping scam, BTW. Or when they skipped my high school graduation because Daniel had a hangover and needed them. Every single time they celebrated his C+ grades while ignoring my straight A's. The more I think about it, the more I realize the Berkeley incident wasn't the cause of our problems, just the final symptom of their toxic favoritism. I called my grandparents yesterday for the first time in years. They apologized for believing the drug stuff and said they should have known better. But they also dropped another bomb. Apparently, Daniel had been lying to our whole extended family for years, telling them I was sending him threatening messages and trying to sabotage his life. He even showed them fake texts as proof. The guy was playing the long game with his manipulation. My girlfriend thinks I should at least hear my parents out. She says everyone deserves a second chance. Easy for her to say, though. Her parents paid for med school and actually love her. Oliver agrees with her, but Oliver also believes in humanity because his parents aren't psychos. But you know what really sealed the deal for me? I found out they only started looking for me after they found Daniel's journal. He wrote this whole confession about everything he did to me, probably when he was drunk or feeling guilty or whatever. They didn't try to find me because they missed me or because they figured out the truth on their own. They only came looking because their dead golden child told them to. So I've made my decision. I'm filing for a restraining order tomorrow. I've already talked to my lawyer about it. 7 years of no contact followed by showing up repeatedly at my house uninvited should be enough for at least a temporary order. I know some people will think I'm being harsh, but here's the thing. I've spent years building a life without them. I've got an awesome career, an amazing girlfriend, the best dog ever. Binary just brought me his test tube while I'm typing this, LOL, and solid friends. Why would I want to add toxic people back into that mix just because they finally realized they backed the wrong son? Yeah, maybe they really didn't know about the drugs. Maybe Daniel manipulated them too. But they were crap parents long before that. And finding out their favorite kid was a liar doesn't automatically make them good parents now. Well, this seems like a good place to end my story. Special shout out to Barbara at Sunshine's Diner for all those expired pies. Victor and his amazing food truck, still the best enchiladas in Boston. Oliver for being the best friend anyone could ask for. My girlfriend for dealing with my trauma, and my chemistry command trained dog. Also, my therapist. who's going to earn her whole year's salary just from tomorrow's session, and binary, the goodest boy, who knows bad parents when he smells them. For those asking, yes, I'm actually doing great now. I'm making more money than I ever would have with that Berkeley degree, living my best life, and finally free from family drama. And yes, binary's commands actually work. My current command list includes binary analyze, sits, binary stabilize, stays, binary neutralize, growls, binary extract, fetches, binary catalyze, rolls over. I regret nothing about teaching my dog chemistry commands. It's brought me more joy than I can express, and it's become a perfect symbol of how I've reclaimed my life and identity after everything that happened. Looking back at this whole journey, from the false accusations to being expelled from my dream school, to working multiple jobs just to survive, to finally finding success on my own terms, I've learned that sometimes the worst moments in your life can lead to unexpected opportunities. That doesn't mean I'm grateful for what my family did to me. It just means I refuse to let their actions define the rest of my life. I've built something better than I ever could have imagined during those dark days working at Target and sleeping in a converted storage closet. My success isn't because of the adversity they put me through. It's despite it. And that's something they can never take credit for or take away from me. So here I am, 7 years later, with a career I love, a brilliant girlfriend who supports me, friends who stood by me when it mattered, and a German Shepherd who growls at toxic people. I'd say that's a pretty good outcome for someone whose life was supposed to be ruined. As for my parents, I'll let the restraining order speak for itself. Some relationships aren't worth rebuilding, no matter how much the other party claims to have changed. Sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is to protect the life you've built and the peace you've earned. Thank you all for reading my story. I hope it helps someone else out there who might be going through something similar to know that rock bottom doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a different and ultimately better path.